Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the last session of our Center for Cities Housing Systems and Innovation Summit. This is our panel for Housing Form Innovations in Systems Context. It's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon. My name is Annika Smith, and I'm the Director of the Windsor Law Center for Cities and Associate Professor at Windsor Law. I want to take a couple of moments, first of all, to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi people, and I'll encourage our panelists, if they would like to, also identify for which traditional territories they are joining us, if they so choose. I also would like to take a moment just to say a huge thanks once again, as I've done at the beginning of every session, but it's really important, in particular since we have some of the representatives of those organizations here with us on this last panel, to thank our sponsors of this week's event. First of all, the University of Windsor Office of the Associate Vice President External, Dr. Vincent Georgie, the the School of Cities at the University of Toronto, and we have a couple of members of our panel this afternoon affiliated with the School of Cities there. The Canadian Urban Institute, Leandro, our moderator this afternoon, is a planner with the Canadian Urban Institute and the Smart Prosperity Institute at Ottawa University. I also want to recognize extra support from the Windsor Regional Society of Architects, from LGA Architectural Partners, and we have Jana Levitt, principal with LGA with us this afternoon, and City Building Ryerson, who have been a big partner, a big support all the way through. It's been a very full couple of days already. We've had great participation, I think some really panels that were the beginning of conversations as much as they were the end. And to that end, certainly this is not the last programming we'll be offering on the housing crisis and our responses to it. So please do keep your ideas flowing in our direction so that we can respond to your desires and needs in this space. We started off the session yesterday with the data around the housing crisis. How bad is it and what is it? And then took a systems approach to sort of say, what are the lenses we need to be applying when we're looking at the housing crisis? And in particular, we've been interested through these 2 days in looking at the housing crisis and responses from climate, equity and inclusion, including generational poverty, and municipal finance. That is sort of what are the costs of sprawl and the costs of different approaches to housing, to ramping up housing that we might take. Those are the three lenses we used throughout. In the second session yesterday, we looked at tools and approaches to determine what the market really wants and needs. And so a lot of interesting stuff coming out of there, some case studies from the US as well as in Canada, municipalities that are trying different things. Heard also from more on the sort of buyer and homeowner side of things, what are some of the changing trends in terms of what people actually want, and is there a sort of a pushback against the traditional white picket fence sort of single family dwelling that we hear a lot about, in particular sort of building out into greenfields. This morning was a really deep dive into some of the more technical tools that are available to municipalities in many cases, but not getting much take up yet. Looked at things like tax increment financing. I talked a bit about community land trusts and some others, and so really got into the weeds with some of the experts there as far as what some of those tools can be. This is in many ways, I think, going to be the most fun panel to close us out, and this is really the chance to do a couple of things. I think when we first conceived of sort of putting this panel on at the end of the day, it was a chance to highlight some of the innovation that's actually happening in the housing sector. And there's an incredible amount of it, which I think is evidenced by how many of you are on the panel today. We really wanted to be able to show off a lot. But it's also has kind of evolved into, I think, what will be an important conversation about your views as innovators and entrepreneurs in this space, about inclusion in the housing industry, about what the regulatory framework and financing frameworks at this moment mean for you trying to navigate those spaces. We hear a lot about reducing red tape and speeding up regulatory processes. We know that sometimes that can be aligned with sort of opening things up, getting rid of environmental assessments, et cetera, but we also know that conversation can be a much more nuanced one, and that's really what we heard this morning. So curious to know from you, where are the barriers? What would help you at this moment? What would help more people like you enter into this space? So very quickly, before I turn things over to Leandro, our moderator, I will just let you know who's on the panel. The deeper dive bios are in the chat so that we don't take up more time there. But I'll first introduce Leandro Santos is research planner with the Canadian Urban Institute, and he'll be your moderator for today. So I'll turn over to him in just a moment. Cheryl Case is founder and principal urban planner of CP Planning, and is also an early career Canadian urban leader designated by the School of Cities at the University of Toronto. Sarah Sipkar is a project lead for ADUsearch.ca, which is a CMHC funded housing innovation, housing data project. And full disclosure, Center for Cities has supported that project, but Sarah is very much the lead on that through Family Services Windsor Essex. She's also a PhD candidate at the School of Geography at University of Toronto. Camilo Garay is the co-founder of Woodhouse Innovation. He has a much broader bio than that and deep community involvement, and you'll see that in his bio as well. So looking forward to hearing from him. Michael Hoppy is the founder of Petite Homes, also wears other hats that may come out in that I think you'll see in the bio as well. Jenna Levitt is the co-founder of LGA Architectural Partners. Kennedy Murray is a student at U Windsor and recently completed a course known as the Ways of Knowing course, and they did a housing intensive course. So that'll be a slightly different view. Kennedy is not sort of out there in the industry yet, but she's also the future, and thinking about sort of what we as institutions can be, educational institutions can be doing to support those innovation in the housing sector. And then last, Reese Trenhill, who is CEO of Walkerville Capital and CEO of the Vanguard team at Manor Real Estate. And I again, bio is there, much speaks for itself, deep experience in real estate and development industry. Thank you so much to all of you. I will now stop talking and turn the floor over to you, Leandro, and really looking forward to this panel. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everybody. My name is Leandro. So I'd just like to start first of all by acknowledging that the land on which I inhabit and essentially working from is part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and Wyandot nations. So as we consider how to solve the housing crisis in Canada, it's very important that we consider the housing system from top to bottom and its impacts across the full spectrum of housing needs. To truly understand the impacts of housing on affordability, we must first reach out to Indigenous and other equity-deserving communities to listen, learn, and craft specific policies that address their unique circumstances and needs. Blanket approaches to housing development cannot possibly account for all experiences. So as we consider housing form innovation, we must ground ourselves in the notion of who the supply will eventually serve. Post-war suburban sprawl and the systems built to support it have ended up with unintended consequences in regard to climate, infrastructure costs, and equity impacts. So I'm really looking forward to see how the housing innovations discussed today can address these impacts. No one solution alone will solve the crisis, but with the right enabling conditions and in tandem, I feel that long-term gains can be made in regards to improving housing affordability from the smallest house to sweeping regulatory reforms. Now, on to housing innovation forms. So we do have the largest panel of the summit. So I'm just going to start in alphabetical order at the top of the list with Cheryl Case. So can you tell us about some of the housing innovations that you've been working on?
Wow, what great fortune I have to go first. The innovation that I'm working on is looking to support the development of more affordable housing by actually diversifying who is able to participate in the process of affordable housing development. Your introduction, Leandro, about how we are, standing on land that was unfairly stolen from Indigenous peoples is very, very important and relevant to the solution that I'm developing. And if you can imagine, the economic opportunities that were provided through the land were very much would narrow down essentially to the colonizing class, the British and such forth, and the people who are within those family dynamics. So going into today, you see that even still, most developers do come from those backgrounds. They have more access to economic wealth and even to say family connections in terms of understanding how does development work. Even other than that, when we look at developing affordable housing, we look at developing on government-owned land. Well, what happens to everybody else? People who don't have access to family members in the development industry, people who are not don't have access to great amounts of cash. So this is the solution that I'm working on. So working with people who own single family houses and building affordable housing in partnership with them, and developing this housing as purpose-built affordable housing. So instead of having it be market-driven housing, it's going to be social housing. And so with the solution named Partner, we actually are really pleased to see that we've actually secured 2 different pilots. So the first pilot was looking at, what would happen, how would a city respond if we're going to be promoting affordable housing in the development, if the development is going to be 100% affordable housing. And the city was actually very pleased to see that proposal, and responded by promoting to encourage us to actually go higher and denser than otherwise would be possible. And so we're now going on to our second site, and we're collaborating with a homeowner there who doesn't have access to capital and doesn't have access to the familiar relationships with those in the industry, but would love to contribute to affordable housing supply. And so, that's what we're really about. And I think it's really important to, our point of economic development is incredibly important. So, in partnering with people who don't have access to land, making sure that the development of that housing also provides economic opportunity for others who haven't had that access. So in terms of the people who are renting the space, the people who are developing the space, being an economic engine for those who have been excluded, and also ensuring that the housing developed is affordable.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to Sarah Sipkar. I know that your firm, or your solo practitioner, is essentially working on a lot of small scale development, and that you've recently built an ADU in your own yard.
Yeah, thanks, Leandro, and thank you for the introduction. And it feels really great to be on this panel with all these very accomplished people. And I know some of you, so it's great to see you all today. As Leandro mentioned, I did build a detached ADU in 2020, a 431 square foot detached unit in my backyard. That kind of spurred a lot of the work that I hope to be talking about a little bit more today around where are ADUs actually possible, and where's the potential for them in our cities. So after that process, and I learned a lot through that process, I started my PhD in planning at the University of Toronto, and I started digging around for data and trying to understand the impact of ADUs. And I really realized that there's not a lot in the Canadian context in terms of understanding the impact of both the potential of detached units, but also even where they are currently in existence. And so what myself and my colleague Fraser Fathers developed last year was an idea that we've called adusearch.ca, which was a proof of concept that we developed for the city of Windsor. And basically what we did with that tool is we tried to measure the physical feasibility on a lot by lot basis across the city in order to be able to see how many lots are actually, suited for ADUs, if it's actually even possible to build one of these detached units. Because I think there's 2 sides of the coin. If we don't know, how can we know the impact of how many housing units that we can potentially build on existing land as infill development? In partnership with homeowners with single family homes. And so, like I said, we created the tool adusearch.ca, and we were successful in receiving funding to scale this tool nationally. So we are now working with the team to be able to replicate it across 100 municipalities across Canada. We do have our team kind of up and running so far, and it's been quite the hurdle of going through a bunch of different zoning bylaws for municipalities and how much they vary and where ADUs are even possible. But we're really excited, and we think the impact of the tool once it's fully scaled is going to be really large. And we really hope that in particular for mid-sized cities like Windsor or like others in Ontario, that we can really demonstrate how much existing land we have on residential properties that could be used to develop more units, and also be a benefit to homeowners as well. And I'll quickly wrap up with saying that our proof of concept, we found out that 29,000 lots in Windsor were eligible for ADUs, which was way more than I was thinking initially. And that's about 43% of residential lots. And so that means that they're quote unquote greenlit, and that in theory that they can house the minimum size of a detached ADU in their backyard. And so I just think the potential there, when you think about, for example, our social housing list is around 5,000 individuals. That's 5,000 units that we could, potentially develop in partnership with existing homeowners. And so I'll get into more of that later, but that's what I'm currently working on right now.
Thank you, Sarah. So next I have Camilo Gray, and please correct me if I said your last name wrong. I see that you have experience right now in wood construction and energy saving methods. Could you tell us more about Woodhouse?
Definitely, and Gray is perfect. And everyone also just calls me Cam, so feel free to call me Cam. And thank you again for the invitation to be on the panel. Leandro, I think one of the things that you mentioned early was the idea around who occupies the housing that's being developed, and the importance of thinking about not just increasing the supply and development, but how we're using these developments and who has access to these developments, and what that interaction with occupants and landowners looks like. And that's really what we're focusing on. So we're a little bit downstream of the development. We're not in the increased supply space. We're all about trying to figure out how to use new developments, existing developments, to better serve the community. Our project focuses on two big pillars. The first one is this idea of curating and nurturing values-based micro-communities. Post-pandemic, everybody has been kind of shoved into their homes. Your home has now become your workplace. Your home has now become your primary hosting area. Your home has been your primary area to invite family and friends in order to stay attached to community. We all know the benefits of community. We all take advantage of the benefits of community, and we're trying to figure out, is it possible, or how could we possibly nurture values-based micro-communities to support tenancy thrive and get closer to wherever it is they're trying to get. So that's the first piece of our project. The second piece of our project is really trying to dissolve the binary choice of renter or owner. Real estate ownership has been an incredibly powerful tool to help individuals grow personal and generational wealth. And that gap between renter and owner is growing and growing and growing. In Toronto, with the average home being well over $1 million, you need 6 figures in order to be eligible for a mortgage. You need over $200K in a down payment. You need strong and long credit history, which cashes out many current residents of the city. It's happening all over the country as well. Individuals are getting cashed out, and it also cashes out newcomers to this country. The hope of a newcomer to come to this country and be able to purchase a home downstream is getting further away. So our project aims to lower the cost of entry by reimagining what it means to be a renter and what it means to be an owner or landlord.
Thank you. I think it's super important in regards to that values-based micro-communities. COVID has essentially shown us the importance of hyper-local and kind of setting up the right conditions to live well in your own neighborhood. So looking to explore that more. Next, I have Michael Hopp of Petite Homes. Tell us more about these tiny homes and how can I get
You're muted. I can't hear you.
Oh, was I muted this whole time?
Mike,
Oh,
I think Michael's muted.
I can't hear him at least.
y'all heard me though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Michael, still can't hear you.
It's good to see a young guy.
There we go.
Problems instead of the old guy.
I still have to check all the time if I'm muted or not. Mike, still having audio problems. I could give you a moment to kind of sort that out. Just going to move on to Jana Levitt. So I know that you have experience in the not-for-profit sector as well as developing Missing Middle. Tell us about the housing solutions that you've been working on.
Sure, thanks.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the thing I want to talk about today is, and we're in a happy place of being able to actually do a project and also be part of a research team, both of them concerned with the gentle density or missing middle. And so the project we're working on, and I guess I just, in following up about what Cheryl and Cam have mentioned, I think one of the extraordinary points that we're at now is there used to be, I would say, more of a binary operation where there were homeowners and not homeowners, and there was not such a big gap between the two. And then there was very comfortable rental and a range of rental. And it seems now we can talk far more about who's excluded from home ownership than included. And that's the space that we're entering in terms of the gentle density. I think it's really important that we identify what each of us means by affordability and who our target audiences are. We're doing a project in the Annex neighborhood of Toronto. Was a single family home, and we are both designing and developing and also going to be partially living in a 5-unit condo on the same lot. So it's really a very robust demonstration that tests a number of scenarios about all to do with both quality of life issues. Can you live in a place that each unit has access to grade, that you are comfortable within an existing neighborhood so that the form of your housing and the scale of your housing does not disrupt the neighborhood? And I don't mean that in a NIMBY way, I just mean morphologically and also in terms of densities. You don't overwhelm a neighborhood by adding incredible density that really taxes infrastructure. And also creating a taxonomy of what a good quality of life can mean in a well-designed rental property, and also the ability to be able to stay in an apartment, a rental apartment, when your life conditions change. So you might move in as a single person, you might take on a partner, you might have a baby, you might have a roommate. Can the housing accommodate that? So that's what we're looking at in this demonstration project. And also with that, we are modeling the embodied carbon. And not only are we modeling it, but we're also tracking it because our target audience is a very solid middle class audience. So we have real budget constraints. So when we model it, we're always saying, well, what does that do to our construction costs? Can we afford that? If we can't afford that, how do we go back to the carbon counting and measure that and see if we can do almost as well doing something else? And so in that way, we're really trying to address the issue of embodied carbon. In terms of operating carbon, we opted for a completely electric system for HVAC. So we have no gas at all in the building. So from an operating perspective, we're really good. And we're now investigating whether we can augment that with a limited amount of solar on the roof. And that would make us zero from an operating perspective, and still manage to do that in a solidly middle class new construction. So that was the challenge that we're working on. And then with Michael Piper at the Tough Lab at Daniels, and Cheryl's involved in this as well, we're actually taking that and looking at it from the perspective of a citizen developer. So if we take this model of gentle density or intensification, how can a homeowner amplify the benefit of owning a home in ways that up until recently we saw very typically in most neighborhoods, by adding on an extension in the back or converting your garage into a unit. So we're working on first research and then a guide to how citizens can increase for the housing stock and also increase the utility of their investment in a home. And also we're looking at models of home ownership. So can you co-own and co-develop a site? And then finally, if not this time, in the next part of the research, we want to analyze the tools that are preventing this kind of gentle density on lots. We're asking what the barriers are to making this more accessible to a greater group of people. For instance, at the moment, you can't do not-for-profit ADUs. There isn't the infrastructure to do that. So as part of this, what would we need to do that? Do we need to start talking about not only development charges, but forms of taxation? Or do we have to advocate for ways in which the government looks at what having land ownership is? So it's really at the intersection of those two issues.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to exploring what those barriers might be in the next round of questions. So I see we have Mike Hop back. How's your mic going?
I'm back. Can you guys hear me now?
Perfect.
All right. Murphy's Law. You know how that works.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. Perfect. Well, I won't, I'll be fairly quick for you guys. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Fantastic. All right. I prepared a little presentation. I always find visuals help, quite well. So as a lot of you know, I'm Michael Hoppy, founder of Petite Homes. Petite Homes is a developer and builder for tiny and affordable homes. And this is our model here, the Craftsman. And so, the fabulous work that Sarah Sipkar and her team did in identifying the 29,000 units, I think that, we have an opportunity to bring housing affordability across Windsor, using that medium. And so, of course, everything has to start with a problem. And we're here today because of housing and affordability. And, the number of homes we need to build is just astonishing. And the current pace of construction, if you look at the status quo today, we can't keep up with the level of demand that's happening. And so I think all of us as allies can see that ADUs, tiny homes, and laneway homes can be a very attractive and affordable solution to this. So me and the team came together and we said, well, how can we design a really nice home that people can build into their backyards? And how do you do it in a way that allows the home to be universal? So every single lot, this could apply to every single lot, not only in Windsor, but across Ontario, and eventually across all of Canada. And so we designed these really nice 1-bedroom units, full kitchen, full bathroom, full bedroom, then all the necessary amenities for comfortable living. So front and back of the home, nice sliding door for the bedroom, so people can have some nice outdoor patio space. And then, of course, for the interiors, we're really trying to find an ambitious balance between, the comforts of living, but of course, affordability. And then a construction timeline that's very quick and effective. Then here, nice bedrooms, full bathroom, stacked washer and dryer, pretty much everything people need. And then, of course, the main use case and showcase for the homes is them being built in backyards, especially backyards with laneways. I don't know the exact number, but I remember reading an article that Windsor had over 100 kilometers, if not more, of laneways alone. Toronto is something about 300 kilometers, if I read that correctly. And so we have an opportunity to transform unused backyards into these new vibrant communities. And so we can see dropping in these units, all over Windsor and eventually across Ontario. The second one as well is for the suburban model, or people who don't have laneways or backyard homes. And so there's even an opportunity, people who want to build in-law suites, spaces for families, parents, their children. Those are a lot of communications we've had with people. And so they can do much the same thing. And then we started exploring the opportunity for affordable villages, and giving the people opportunity to either rent or purchase affordable homes in village and tiny home community-like settings, which I think, as we go across Windsor and southwestern Ontario and then across Ontario, is going to be much needed in terms of how we rethink housing. So round of applause. The work Sarah did with her team is just unbelievable. And I'd say the weight of what this map has allowed cannot be, said well enough. Sarah, congratulations. Like, you guys have done a phenomenal job. This process used to be manual. We used to go in and look at somebody's property and, go and say, we have to look at the zoning bylaws. This is an RD1. What does that mean? Then we have to go and assess the site physically ourselves. The work Sarah has done has made the opportunity for laneway homes and ADUs accessible across Ontario. And then I know their ambitions to go across Canada, I think will open up a grand opportunity for creating housing affordability across this country. So congratulations, guys. We want to build a factory for petite homes. And so one of the reasons, if you look at things that make housing unaffordable, one is variability. The houses are all different, things change. You see a lot of developers try and make 3 or 4 of the same models. In the tiny home world, we can make the same model and make it small enough to apply to any properties. And so if we can make a factory, we can reduce the cost of the homes significantly. And we can also have them built in, anytime less than a week, we could say, where we could ship these out of Windsor. And of course, we could have these petite homes or any tiny homes in general. I think not only for petite homes, but how do developers in general start looking at manufactured housing as a solution for that? And then, of course, you want to bring the application across the entirety of the country. Not just petite homes, but how do we start thinking on the level beyond just Windsor, Ontario, but how do we really get a lot of thinking on our panel in our city to say, hey, we have all the talent here in Windsor. How do we bring this talent together to really bring an incredible solution across the country that brings forth Sarah's team, everybody who's on this call, the architects that are on this call? How do we start thinking together for how do we bring affordable housing across Canada? And then, of course, the number one thing that I found when dealing with customers that are barriers to entry for tiny homes is, number one, nobody knows where to start. They don't know how to navigate the building department process. Permits are scary. Permitting fees are scary. A lot of things are unknowns. And we need to automate that process for people. We need to say, you can buy this home for one inclusive price and we'll take care of all the rest. And I think that's for all of us. The next is all-inclusive pricing. So as you know, construction costs are variables. We need to find a way to make everything all under one cost. The cost for sewers, plumbing, permits, etc. And then the next one is really waking people up to the idea of laneways and ADUs. It's scary to a lot of people. How do we make it friendly and inviting? And how can we utilize new virtual technology to let people really see and experience these homes so that they're not afraid of them, so they don't see them as these novel concepts? So with that, thank you guys for allowing me to present this and for having me on the panel. I think we all share the same vision. And I think that vision, at least from my perspective, is how do we create fun, dense, urban environments? How do we, none of us want urban sprawl. And I think if we don't attack and we don't go into, really bringing our brains together to say, how can we solve this crisis? If we don't do it, they are just going to build urban sprawl. You are going to see Toronto spread out. You are going to see Windsor spread out past the airport. And we need to find a way to make an alternative that is far more attractive, because we all love living in communities. We love it. We love having cafes and coffee shops down our streets. Walkerville's a prime example of that. And how do we make more of that? And how do we do less suburban sprawl? So I think if we have a common shared vision, it's this really beautiful blend of densification within our urban centers, but doing it in a very delicate way that is, doesn't dramatically transform the cities, but really brings more and more people together in community. So I hope that wasn't too long. I thank you guys very much, and anybody's free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Love the visuals, super helpful for me as well as the audience. All right,
thank you. Here,
so
I'll find a way to stop sharing. Oh, there it is. Thank you guys so much.
All right, so next I have Kennedy Murray, a student at the U of Windsor. Oftentimes students get access to a lot of the most forward thinking in regards to their academic education. So tell us about your experience as a student and some of the solutions you might see as good potential.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a privilege to speak with you today. I am honored to have this opportunity. Today, I'm going to tell you about a project I worked on in the class Ways of Knowing with Professor Tim Burnett regarding Flourish Farms. And my classmates also helped Anna, Noor, Zain, and Zayad. We used the Human Development and Capabilities approach, which is the underpinning of the United Nations, to create a pitch to help us with the housing crisis in Windsor. Flourish Farms was inspired by a 2016 census study by Windsor. It was found that 1 in 4 children in Windsor live below the poverty line. In addition, C4C reported in 2018 that 286 women were turned away from domestic violence shelters. Flourish Farms targets this demographic because we believe it can reduce generational poverty and abuse and help the housing crisis overall. To help the demographic flourish, we focused on Martha Nussbaum's 10 central capabilities. For example, bodily integrity, the freedom of mobility with a safe and secure shelter, and control over environment, for example, freedom of choice over food and clothes, as well as school and career. We aim to become self-sustaining and by selling produce on the farm. This would continue all year long as we found means to do it. For example, canning and burying food. The farm includes a rec area, group and personal counseling resources, daycares, and even stores. Food and clothing clothing is done by donations, but it appears in stores to make things seem more normal, free of cost for staying on the farm. The people that would stay on the farm would stay in double stacked shipping containers with living quarters for children to keep families intact. And we would build tiny homes kind of based off models seen built by the CMHC in BC for native reserves. We believe Flourish Farms would allow people to gain capabilities through positive work and collective living.
Thank you. I love the idea of converting shipping containers. It's so out of the box, or I guess in this way, in the box. I'm sure there's a better way to frame that. So last but not least, Rice, and tell me if I pronounce this wrong, Trenhale. You have quite a deep experience in the real estate development sector as well as in private equity. So tell us about some of the housing innovations that you've been working on.
Yeah, I don't know if you just called me Rice, Leandrew, but it's Reese.
Reese. Oh, okay. So I had it all wrong. Okay.
No, it's okay. I'm hungry, so I heard Rice, right? Yeah. I apologize in advance if I'm a little sluggish. I'm only 3 hours removed from 25 hours of traveling. So yeah, that was fun. That was fun. The stuff that I do, it looks like I'm the one capitalist pig on this panel. I do develop for profit, but as a few of the local Windsorites know on this panel, I'm a diehard urban intensifier. I lived downtown for 16 years in a condo, and as the property values got up to a point where it was actually profitable to do larger scale developments, I ended up joint venturing with a real estate income trust out of the GTA. And with the combination of sort of property values rising and the downtown community improvement plan providing sort of necessary incentives, all of a sudden mathematically it made sense to sort of create urban density by converting old office space that's just sitting there empty and converting it into between 4 buildings will add about 200 beds to the downtown core. Yeah, I will note that that those buildings now have been largely exhausted in the downtown core, and you can expect sort of more sort of now development on parking lots and building up that urban intensification that way. In fact, BK Cornerstone in the downtown core now is building 84 condo units. So I can actually, Sarah's going to be excited because I'm actually going to talk about ADU today. I am going to talk about ADU. Yes, I'm going to do it for you. I've got a pitch on that stuff. But yeah, so what I'm good for basically is large scale urban intensification for profit. Thanks to Ira Kuzmarich, which is one of the local MPs down here, we were introduced as a group to the CMHC's programs for affordable housing. And again, for the capitalist pig, it is cost effective to utilize the CMHC to add affordable housing into your new building builds. And that's now something we're looking at now that the older buildings have been exhausted. So that's what I do in a nutshell when I'm not traveling for 25 hours.
All right, thank you so much. So that is the first round. We are now moving on to second round, which are essentially what are some of the enabling conditions that you would need to help your innovation projects move forward, and what are the barriers you foresee needing to be overcome? I'm going to start back at the top of the list with Cheryl Case.
Sorry, I had the honors of going first. May I not have this honor again this time? Give me a break.
Sure, that's totally fine. Okay, so I'm going to go to Sarah Sivkar. And in regards to the work that you're doing on ADU search and also your experience building an ADU, let's dig in a little more into what those regulatory and financial barriers might be, and also how ADU search can be built upon in the future and what you might need to improve that.
Sure, thank you. I know there's a few of us on the panel around ADUs and different forms of housing, so I probably have a lot of support to say less restrictive ADU bylaws and no parking minimums. That's, I mean, from a building, a zoning and building perspective, I think that's a given. You know, one of the things that Michael hit on a bit was right now, and actually not just Michael, a few of the panelists have hit on this. Right now, the development industry is concentrated by a very few number of individuals who have access and are more sophisticated in terms of how they have access to capital, how they understand the process, where they're making their investment decisions, which are often profit driven. And that's not necessarily always good for the community. And I think what ADUs do is provide an opportunity to decentralize some of that development. It's not a perfect way. There are still barriers towards now homeownership that are, increasingly problematic and widening the gap with a lot of Canadians. But I think what ADUs provide the opportunity to do is an average person to develop a unit or two. In the case of Windsor, you can actually develop 2 ADUs, one attached and one detached, which if it's done en masse, that actually has a big potential, I think, to alter our housing supply. So I think one of the changes that needs to happen is the way that we see development and how municipalities, how different other stakeholders, for example, financial institutions and lending institutions see development and see the average homeowner. So for example, I've connected with Camilo before. He's working on a shared equity model, and I think that's really awesome. And if that could be a way, for example, to have more people enter the wealth building tract with ADUs, that's currently not possible. So I think that there are a number of players who need to think about development and housing a bit differently. And I think the other thing that needs to happen is municipalities themselves making the process less opaque. And so again, Michael Hoppy talked about this, but if I'm an average homeowner and I have to go through the process and of just building an ADU, there are so many boxes that need to be checked, and many homeowners are just not sophisticated enough to know that process as they've never been through it. And so I think, while I don't want to say we need to completely loosen restrictions and make it possible to build whatever, we need to make the process less opaque and easier for the average person to enter in with less investment and less capital in order to actually get the kind of results that we want. And I think the last thing that I'll say is ADUs are not a silver bullet. And I say this as someone who is an ADU promoter. They're not a silver bullet for affordability, because at any point an investor can charge market rate rent. And so there really does need to be a concerted effort by all levels of government to actually have proper regulation around rentals. And I know that Reese and I may disagree on this a little bit, but I think that we really need to think about affordability as not just a supply type that we need more of, and that will lower rents or lower the prices of homes. We need to actually think about regulation to prevent speculative investing. And so that's a whole different conversation and not necessarily a housing type innovation. But I do think that I don't want to conflate that message that ADUs will solve all our problems. They won't. They'll solve some of our problems and they'll add a lot of units, but we really need to focus on affordability from the financial regulatory mechanisms that governments have. So I'll stop there. So thanks for giving me first crack at that. I might have stole someone else, other people's thunder, but thanks.
Thank you. I'd actually,
I was wanting to jump in on that because I definitely 100% agree. Like the ADUs as a built form provides an opportunity to democratize or bring down the barriers in terms of who's able to be a part of the affordable housing or the housing development space. In order for that housing to be affordable, there needs to be a lot of other supports that are wrapped around to ensure that outcome. So on the topic of regulations, I think it definitely can be a part of the approvals process. So for example, right here in Toronto, we're looking at the approvals process of inclusionary zoning. And that's kind of a new type of policy tool that would require the inclusion of affordable housing in development approvals. We've always had Section 37 benefits, right? So if you're going to be building more than what's currently there, you're going to have to pay some type of benefit or include something that would contribute to the community. And there are other types of regulations that have existed. For example, you can include, grants and incentives, rebates into the regulations that say that, okay, if you're going to be building this type of housing, you're going to receive a rebate if you include it as affordable housing. And then we're also going to track to make sure that the housing is affordable for a duration of time. In terms of the land use, another way that you can look at ensuring the development of housing is affordable, you can actually put covenants and regulations into the land itself, requiring for it to be affordable, regardless of who's coming in and coming out, right? Looking at also the investors. The investors that's a huge component to the approvals process. How do you even get your foot into the door to have a proposal? You need to have the right investors on your side, right? So say if you're going to be building housing and you're going to be building with an investor who has dedicated to protecting affordable housing, or if you're developing housing and you're a nonprofit, then the approvals process should consider that and should bring down the barriers so that it's actually cost competitive for a nonprofit affordable housing developer to build as opposed to a for-profit developer to build. So I think in that regard, if you're looking at the competition between a nonprofit and a for-profit, the approvals process really needs to incentivize and level the playing field so that the approvals process does encourage and enable that affordable housing development.
Thank you to the both of you. I'd actually like to kind of dig into what Sarah had mentioned in regarding to the work you're doing, Cam, with the shared equity model. In regards to regulatory and financial processes, how do you see that as contributing to housing affordability solutions?
I think that one of the things, well, first, I just want to double down on everything that was said by Sarah and Cheryl. I definitely co-sign everything that was said. And I think that one thing that I would also encourage municipalities to do is try to engage different actors in this space. I think that looking for the private sector to help drive solutions isn't going to help. Sorry to create a line between us and Reese. But there's no real reason for them to change anything. Like it's a capitalist system. They're increasing margins. They're trying to find the fattest margins. And why would anyone in that position choose to do otherwise? Why would anyone in that position want to share equity? Like if we're talking about shared equity, like does that, for what? You know what I mean? I think cryptocurrency provides like a good analog to the financial space. If we were to ask the banks to leverage blockchain technology to develop new currencies that would shift away power from them and would shift power away from regulatory bodies, why would they do it? That came from external pressures, and now governments in the financial sector are scurrying, trying to figure out, should they integrate, should they adopt, how do they want to interface with this new technology? Because it is democratizing a lot of sectors that weren't democratized before. So I think that we're currently in a position right now where we need to start looking at new actors and new individuals to take over this space. I think even what Airbnb did to the hospitality space, hospitality was monopolized by the big chains, Hilton, Sheraton, Marriott, the international chains. There's no reason and no way that Marriott would have colluded to develop a platform like Airbnb that shortened their margins. I think the majority of millennials today, if they're vacationing, are going on Airbnb before they jump on a Hilton website to book a hotel in Mexico. And there's no reason for them to have done that. They had a stranglehold on the market, and it's the same situation in the developer side of things. There's no reason for them to give up market share or pieces of the market currently. with this big focus on ESG, with this big focus on private businesses cleaning the act up, making sure that supplier diversity is a thing, making sure that inclusive governance practices is a thing. Now private businesses are being held to a different standard. So there might be shifts moving forward, but I don't think that municipalities should rely on these shifts moving forward. I think that we need to look at other actors in other spaces that can create real competition to the current state of things. And I think with that said, I think municipalities are very hungry for innovation, but are also very afraid of innovation. I think whenever you bring an idea to them, they always want a proof of concept. They're curious if this has been done in other cities, if this has been done in other countries, if this has been done in regions. And I think that that's the killer of innovation. When we decided to go to space for the first time and start colonizing space, nobody did that before, but people invested in that. When we decided to start creating holes underground with the boring company, no one has done that yet, but we're trying to actively put highways underground. Not that I agree with what's happening, but I think the point is worth bringing up. Looking for proof of concepts in other areas to see if the pilot or the test is a viable solution is the antithesis to innovation. So I think that municipalities also need to get a little bit bolder, a little bit more braver, and start investing in new ideas and rolling the dice. We already know that the current status quo is not working for a large majority of Canadians. So we should
Camila,
double down. Yep.
I'd like to kind of give Reese an opportunity to respond to your earlier comment. Essentially, given Reese your experience, I'd like to kind of get an idea of your sense of thoughts on how to potentially elevate equity deserving groups to the level of players in the housing industry in regards to who's in and who's excluded, as well as what the barriers to entry you've seen.
Is that directly in relation to the majority of this conversation, which is the ADU model?
No, you can go beyond that. This is in regards to kind of overall housing innovation flows from the regulatory and kind of finance perspective. A lot of equity deserving groups just don't have the upfront finance to take part in the industry. So I'm just wondering, from your point of view, do you have any thoughts or takeaways from that?
Sure. Yeah, let me premise this by saying I've been involved with politics and policy since I was 18 years old. And so not just a capitalist pig. When it comes to policy, I don't know, it doesn't matter if it's environment, it doesn't matter what it is. A lot of the best policies when you want to affect change are a balance between and an acceptance, basically, that we are a capitalistic society. And also the acceptance of human greed. Without human greed, communism would work. But the best systems in the world are free and liberal democracies that utilize capitalism heavily. The good news is, and this is where I wanted to talk to and support sort of what Sarah is talking about in the models that Sarah's been working on down here, and on a lot of you guys, obviously. For example, you look at development we did in Windsor recently, or it's under development, 150 units, affordable housing. It costs $258,000 per unit for the city to build that building, right? To get 150 units. If the city would get out of that business and actually allow, I'll give you an example. So that's $258,000 a unit. Imagine now you either create tax incentives for the average homeowner, right? Build a mother-in-law suite, make it affordable housing for 20 years, and you don't have to pay your city taxes for 5, 10 years, whatever. I'm using arbitrary numbers. Great. That's called a tax. I had to look it up actually, because I call them TIFs, but it's called a tax increment financing. It's been done for about 40 years in the Western world. I prefer the grant model because most people don't understand that kind of stuff, right? I would rather see people of the working class and middle class that own their houses, and I would rather say, here's a $50,000 grant. It's got to be an affordable house in your backyard, or an addition off your house, or a mother-in-law suite in your basement. And it's got to be affordable, and that'll be an encumbrance against your title for 20 years, even if you sell the house. and here's 50 grand, get it done. And now what you're doing is you're incentivizing your own populace and providing money and profits to your own populace. And you're also wiping out your, in our case in Windsor, your 5,000 person deficit. Think about what it means when there's a waiting list of 5,000 people that need affordable housing. Think about what that means from a social perspective. You are harming those people. They are suffering. And they're suffering where we're waiting through this bureaucratic nightmare and relying on just, and I'm not, look, for full disclosure, I am not a right-wing capitalist. I'm no fan of Pierre Poilievre. I'm a centrist. But I mean, there's a reality check here. It is not working. You have a deficit of 5,000. These people are suffering every day, having to choose between pharmaceuticals and food. And if the city would get out of its own way, and quite frankly, the city is the worst slumlord in Windsor. It is a concentration of poverty, and you're robbing these people of opportunities for social mobility. You know, as soon as you live in a mother-in-law suite, you're now surrounded by people in middle-class and working-class homes. You know, that refugee kid from Afghanistan could end up living next to Luigi, the concrete guy. You know, now he's got an opportunity to work on concrete and learn to trade during the summer. He's not going to get that if he lives in the middle of a slum that's city-sponsored. You know, so, hey, look, I'm a little passionate about this stuff, but utilize human greed, utilize capitalism, let the working class and middle class that own these homes create a profit for themselves while wiping out this deficit. So again, coming back to it, I really think, and if I can encourage this panel on anything, don't try to change the system. Get your wins within the system. We're a free and liberal democracy and we're capitalists. And provide and think of policies that mirror that, right? It's cheaper for the city, so it's cheaper for the taxpayer. It's simpler for the city. Think of it. This is the other part of it too. As soon as you take the city and the city's resources and all the effort and all the bureaucrats that went into building Meadowbrook and those 150 units, imagine if we use the Norwegian model now where those 150 units are now for the homeless, so that you're concentrating them. So now you can concentrate social services there. Think about how much more of an impact that's got from a municipal level, right? So if you give the opportunity for all these working class, middle class now make a profit and wipe out this deficit. By the way, I did the math for 10 years, 25 million a year. That's what it would cost the city taxpayers. It's completely affordable for the city of Windsor to do that and wipe out your deficit. And you could use Sarah's EDU search so that the city can be proactive and actually reach out to these 29,000 people and say, hey, we want to give you $50,000, do this. Right.
So I like the, you know, kind of working with within like means and kind of leveraging how people act, but also kind of, I wanted to move the conversation towards two other things. First, I wanted to kind of explore with Jana Levitt. You had mentioned the idea of the citizen developer, and I think that kind of builds upon what Reese is talking about. So could you kind of talk about in a systems context, how that can be enabled?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to back up for a second. I don't think there's a kind of a one standard approach or one size fits all. I think it's going to take all the solutions that everybody's talking about today to work coherently to really unlock the housing situation. I think all the things that everybody's trying to work on are solutions. I would say in many cases, what people are talking about are not innovative. They're ideas that have been tested in the past. So tiny homes, you could say what the government built at the beginning of the Second World War with all the tiny housing for military all across the country. That was tiny homes developed that are now very comfortable, middle class, upper middle class houses that fit into the fabric. And that's not to knock what that is. I'm just saying, I don't think that there are that many new ideas. And I think we could actually learn from those ideas. I would say what we're doing on Ulster is not a new idea. One of the differences, there are so many more regulations involved in construction now and involved in development. And there is so much more money at stake that you start to get that kind of separation between big developers and nobody. Whereas previously, and in my neighborhood in Little Italy, I've been living here for 25 years. Over this time, I've seen it go from a very, first generation group of people who fixed up their own houses, built their own houses, refaced their own houses, people who had a lot of ability to affect change with very little money, to being an upper middle class neighborhood where people who moved here for the first time couldn't afford it. So what's at stake is really high, and the requirements are really large. So, but what I feel is important to interject here is asking or highlighting the role of the government writ large. And up until recently, so the post-war period in housing that I think would be absolutely essential to recognize is after the war, there was a explicit understanding that the government was going to get involved in housing, create affordable housing, and create a situation of equity for home ownership. That, again, it wasn't for everybody, but it was for very many people. And in the 70s, many people have written about this. The government started to withdraw from that. What I see as an architect working in not-for-profit is all of those people who then were beneficiaries of the government providing money, grants, bursaries, underwriting through loans. Not-for-profit housing are now able, because they own the land free and clear, to leverage that and create more not-for-profit housing. That is an old model that has an incredible resilience. I think it's really important that when we look at the model now, and Cheryl was talking about how there's a time frame, there's a limit to how much our taxpayers have in terms of the investment in not-for-profit housing. So you have private developers building not-for-profit housing, and then in 20 years, it goes back to the for-profit sector. I don't think that's a good investment. I don't think it's a good investment as taxpayers. I don't think it's a good investment in terms of ensuring continuity of affordable housing. So I think we have to look back at the things that have actually worked quite well and isolate the things that have changed. And in that case, I would say much of that change stems from a change in philosophy about who should be involved in creating housing and who deserves housing. So I just think that's really important to point out. And I would say a lot of the restrictions that we faced in doing, for instance, Ulster, had to do with, I would say, at the, if you scrape away everything else, a philosophical idea about what constitutes good housing. So a small, really well-built, well-designed, but small shared form of housing was considered second best, as opposed to a single family house. That affects everything down.
So just kind of being mindful of time, there's a few things that I want to cover. So I know I want to get back onto the topic of tiny homes, and I know that Mike has a story to share with the audience regarding his experience with that.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I'll be fairly brief, but I agree with a lot of the points that were said here. I think there was an article in the Windsor Star where a question was asked, what's the smoking gun? What kicks off ADU and tiny home developments? And it was incentive grants. And so, for example, when we meet with property developers, landlords, the big thing for them is, what's my ROI? That's all they care about. They don't want to build it for any other reason except for, what's their profit margins. And that's the unfortunate reality that we live in. So unless we provide incentive through grants or showcase, incredible return on investment, you're not going to see any, probably much of any affordable housing or tiny homes or ADUs get built. The second nature to that is homeowners that do want to build are completely blind in terms of, and it's not their fault, they just don't know how to navigate the city. The building permit process, it's scary to them. The idea of, never-ending questions. Are my taxes going to increase? What happens if they reassess my property? Just a never-ending questions of fear. And so if we can find a way to answer those questions and have, everything nice and packaged for them, for homeowners to build and turn homeowners into developers with incentive grants from the city, I think you'll see that start to explode. You incentivize people and you eliminate all of the fear that goes into how do we build these. Basically, you do it all for them. Now, we had proposed a tiny home village. I'm not going to name any names or specificities, but there was a lot of fear around that proposal. There was a lot of fear for, how do we fit this into the context of the city? How does this work with, the city's master plan? Do we have zoning for this? It was a novel concept for the area. And so I think somebody else had mentioned it earlier. When you bring novel concepts to cities and they haven't seen it before, they want proof points and they want you to make an entire case. And so we basically left that meeting with, you have to convince us why this is a good idea. And the answer couldn't have been simply, we're building affordable housing or we're giving people the opportunity to purchase affordable homes. That was not the answer they were looking for. They were looking for a systematic approach as to tell us through, statistics and proof points from other municipalities, build us this report as to why this is, why we should even consider such things. And when the obvious answer is right in front of them. So, and we don't know how to look at that. We're like, I'll give you, I'll show you what they do in California. I'll show what they do across the United States. I don't know what else to tell you. Like it's, so I think you get a lot of that. In terms of innovation, I see a lot of innovation in the Bay Area. So for everybody in the call, I live and work in San Francisco. And for that innovation, you see startups coming in to do crazy stuff, build factories, 3D print entire homes. I know that there's a whole group here building 3D homes, 3D printed homes. They're coming in, but they're also raising so much capital. I'm talking like $400 or $500 million that they themselves can be financiers, that you don't have to rely on the banks and you don't have to rely on lenders to go through a process of approving for tiny homes or ADUs. These startups are raising so much money, they can go to homeowners and say, we'll build everything. You don't even worry about it. Just sign here on the dotted line. I'm sure there's other process involved, but we'll build it for you. We'll put it on site. We'll connect services. And all we have to do is share rent for X number of years, say 20, 25 years. And that is, it's not innovative, but it's something that at least unlocks that opportunity. So I think, like everybody said, there's no right or wrong answer to this. There's no one solution meets all. But I think what it is going to take to solve this is some hard entrepreneurial thinking and saying, how do we bring systems together and how do we package solutions for people that is super simple, easy, one click. You want the people who say, I want an ADU in my backyard. All they have to do is click and pre-order it on a website and boom, we take care of all the rest. We do the permits, we do the site plans, we do the construction, we do the financing. They don't have to do anything. You eliminate all barriers to entry and all unknown fears. Take it all away from them. That should be the mission on everybody here. Take away fear from the general public. Make them feel really good about it.
I find the work that you've been doing for tiny homes and especially the potential of automation to reduce costs and timelines is a really good opportunity. I want to give Sarah an opportunity to kind of speak to your points as well. And I kind of want to get the focus from the ADU practitioners on the call in regards to what the role of municipal government could be in regards to pre-approvals as well as toolkits for enabling ADUs on a systems level.
Sure, thanks, Leandro. I had some comments around specifically the regulatory barriers, as I know that's supposed to be the focus of the conversation. So I won't get too much into the affordability piece. What I wanted to say was, I think that what often happens with, I'll say missing middle housing generally, but specifically with ADUs, is that there's often a lot of bylaws that end up conflicting with one another and don't necessarily make sense. Like they make sense on paper, but not in the real world. And one of those examples that I have, and I thought I'll just give it because it's really practical, is that right now, if you have a single family home in the city of Windsor, you can effectively add 2 units to it. In theory, you can add an attached or you can add a detached unit and a detached unit. What happened, one client that I was working with wanted to add an additional unit to a duplex, which effectively is 3 units on a lot. But because the duplex doesn't meet the building type that the zoning bylaw specifically references, you can't add that 3rd unit. And there's a whole process of how we were like, well, you could just change the building type. How do you go about changing the building type, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the common sense reading of that should just be that the city could step in and say, okay, we're going to allow that other unit because of these reasons. And I'm not trying to hate on the city of Windsor. I work closely with them and they've been great partners, but I'm just using the example as the ways that sometimes there are unintended consequences for conflicting bylaws. And I think that that's an example of where this person invested $9,000 in drawings for architectural drawings and then had to pull the plug because actually changing the building type of the main dwelling was too onerous, because they would have to bring that main dwelling up to code. And it's like, 100-year-old house in the core of Windsor, like that's going to be opening a can of worms that they weren't really willing to do. And that's a really practical example of how sometimes this person wanted to add a beautiful 800 square foot 2-story ADU on his property. It was a double lot, perfectly well suited, and a common sense reading of the bylaws should have allowed for it. And if we would have fought it, maybe we could have went forward, but ultimately that person determined that the risk was too great. And I think to Michael's point is that what happens is there's a threshold of risk when your savings is on the line for the average person. And if we want to actually open up the development world to more than just people who have access to capital and can lose $9,000 on a project, it's not a big deal. If we want to actually open it, we have to make things much more streamlined. And so from a supply side of things, I am really passionate about, closing those loops and making sure that, we can work with cities. And part of the tool that we're developing, ADU Search, is implicitly to say, hey, maybe your ADU bylaws are much more restrictive than you think that they are. And you might think this is great, but in the end, it's going to result in not a lot of ADUs built. And so I think I'm just speaking from my own experience, and I think there's others who can speak to this too, but it's not just about cutting red tape. It's actually about making sure that there's continuity and efficiency and streamlining of those bylaws to make it really clear for the average person what they can and can't do, and to make some of those common sense kind of like overrides. And so I just want to make I just want to go off Michael's point to say some of that, because I know that's supposed to be the focus of this session a bit.
And so just considering the time constraints, and I don't want to lose this piece of the conversation. I want to go back to one of the guiding questions. Essentially, it's true innovation will see more equity-seeking groups play larger roles within the systems context. So how do we elevate those voices to become investors, developers, and landlords? And I feel that considering your experience, Cheryl, that you might be able to speak to this.
Sure, yeah. Well, I just wanted to share that I really do think like the piece about finances and incentives around the development of affordable housing is very much a part of this kind of regulatory conversation. Although it's not specific to built form, it's important to the financial cultural relationship that we have with land. And the built form, I think, is a moving target, right? Right now we're focused on ADUs. Never know, in 3-4 years, we're going to be talking about 3-story developments, 4-story developments, 5-story developments. It's a moving target, right? Who is actually able to be a part of that process and that new opportunity that's opened up through the new standard in terms of what's appropriate for development. So I just wanted like closing the loopholes definitely are super important. But I wanted to reaffirm to the audience that like this financial piece is a huge part of this conversation. So in terms of reaching out to people who own single family houses, I'm born and raised in Toronto. Almost every single detached house in the city of Toronto, in particular, let's focus on Etobicoke, is zoned to permit up to 2 stories. You can go through but they're built as bungalows. So through a simple minor variance, you can almost double the value of your home by adding a story. Yet you'll find not more than 10% of people, if not less, maybe 5%, actually go through that process of building on their property. There's a huge pot of money they're sitting on, and they can, make it even bigger essentially because by adding that additional story. So it's not just about the zoning regulations, it's about actually incentivizing and enabling people to dive into that opportunity of building on their asset. And so that's where that regulation piece around the financial incentives is incredibly important, and reaching out to homeowners and letting them know, like, you can do this, and providing, and I think I love what Mike was saying, right? Remove the fear element from this, right? If you can provide the services and the know-how and kind of be the concierge, bringing them through the steps, that's where you're going to actually see that development of housing. And again, reaffirming that financial piece is so important, because if you then, let's say, allow everybody to build an additional story to their house or ADU in their backyard, not everybody will do so, but everybody will see the economic benefit of that without even having to build. The value of their home naturally goes up because the potential is now there, right? So that's where, again, the regulation is important to prevent that speculative price increase without actually that result of increased housing supply. And so, what Camilla was saying about like ESGs, right? There are a huge number of financial organizations out there who are looking for an investment. They're hungry. They have a mandate to increase their bottom line and increase returns for their investors, or even for the pension holders. And how do we get those people to invest in affordable housing? The Justice Fund, which is a nonprofit organization in Toronto, founded by a friend of mine, and also co-sponsored by 40, which is Greg's producer. They've been having a huge campaign identifying that there are about $750 billion in assets in the philanthropic sector that is just being held up. And imagine if even a portion of that was put into affordable housing. The National Housing Strategy, the strategy that's supposed to end homelessness, is only a $50 billion investment by the government. That required dozens of years of lobbying from community activists. So if the government can invest $50 billion after decades of lobbying and tons of suffering from lower income people, yet we're having $750 billion within the philanthropic sector. We have another huge buckets of money in the pension funds, which are government controlled organizations. Why can't we leverage some of that to actually build affordable housing, deploy it to actually build affordable housing? There are tons of people who would be ready to go ahead and build that additional story on their house. I know this because, so one of my the solution that I've been here to talk about, Partna, we actually had a survey that was sent out in Toronto. We had about 88 of the respondents owned a property. About 22 of them owned 2 properties that, so 88 respondents owned a single family house that had a potential to add affordable housing on it, either through a story addition, laneway, or even they imagine amalgamating their properties to build affordable housing. 22 of those owned 2 properties. And all of them expressed great interest in developing affordable housing on their housing. Would they go out and do it by themselves? Hell no, they won't do it. But if having groups like those in the room going out, reaching out to them, de-risking the process, removing the fear, providing the investment, collaborating with our municipal partners, provincial partners, and federal partners to provide the incentives so that the budget actually works, right? That's the innovation that will actually empower homeowners to jump into this.
So I just kind of want to jump in. So just considering time, I want to kind of give an opportunity to the youngest person on our panel, Kenny Murray, in regards to some of the solutions and barriers that she has seen in her studies. And I kind of wanted you to speak to the housing crisis is essentially going to affect everybody down the line. And we really need to start thinking about the long-term impacts of the housing and affordability. So as the next generation who's going to be impacted by this, what are the solutions and barriers from your point of view, as well as from an educational standpoint? What are the supports needed for the next generation of urbanists to tackle this issue?
I think that some of the barriers to this come from a place of humanities. That could be because I'm in the field of humanities for my degree, but I definitely think a humanitarian approach is a good approach. I think we need to frame policy from a down approach, not down up approach, not top down approach. We need to consider real needs of real people, and more thought needs to be considered when we're thinking about what we're incentivizing and whose needs we're actually trying to meet by doing that. Ways of Knowing has really showed me the importance of having these conversations, but also it matters who we're having the conversations with, and those who are on the top can't fully understand what it's like to be on the bottom. The voices that are impacted need to be heard first and foremost, and to understand those needs, we have to actually listen to them. For example, there's a large shift in conversation that's occurred for houses. A lot of people are talking about saving for down deposits for vans and stuff like that, instead of saving for down deposits on houses and renovating those. And this shift has occurred largely because of the housing crisis. And as someone who's stayed in Walmart parking lots and lived in a trailer, there's certain elements of central capabilities that just aren't met by living in a van. And I think conversations are leaving out those who've actually had these experiences and knowing what the actual experience is actually like and what it entails to actually meet those needs. So going back to the central capabilities, because that's what the farm is based around, it's difficult to have control over your environment when you're on public property. You lose a sense of bodily integrity, freedom to roam, a sense of affiliation from being a neighbor, even like school considerations and like location. So my experience isn't everyone's experience, but I think these conversations need to happen so that we can address what needs aren't currently being met from a bottom-up perspective, instead of asking people who already have these things what they think that people need. And I think that a good way to change this, it comes with shifting how we're measuring flourishing. I think that we have to stop focusing on wealth and finance and GDP and shift it to humanities and central capabilities. I think that education plays a large role in the shift. Teaching students about ethics and communication, helps shift from utilitarian aims, and it teaches people how to be people, which I believe ripples and can help create innovative projects like Flourish Farms. As for education wise, would you mind repeating the second part to the question?
Okay, so essentially, I just kind of want to get your sense as a student, what are the types of educational supports needed, and perhaps what are kind of what do students need in order to tackle these issues once they become practitioners? What do they
Okay,
need to know?
oh, sorry. Okay, so kind of like I just touched on, I think that we have to move away from utilitarian aims. Teaching people to be people is really important, and I think the structure of education. You have to teach people about biases and all these things that go a lot deeper. Before you can start finding solutions, you have to actually address what the deeper rooted problem is, which I don't think the deepest rooted problem lies in like wealth. I think like it lies in humanity. And so I think we have to address that first and foremost. And I think that comes with the framework of our education systems and how we teach people and how we build communities and classrooms, how we interact with each other. I think that there's some courses, especially in the humanities, that have really good frameworks. Ways of Knowing, I love the framework to that class. We use the human development and capabilities approach, which is something I found really useful. But I think frameworks like this, especially used in the humanities, are really helpful for growing people and making people be people and see other people as human beings, which actually creates a lot of change, in my opinion.
I find having that humanities and even that social sciences point of view in regards to looking at regulatory policies can seem very objective or abstract, but there needs to be a consideration on how they actually impact specific groups of people. And that experience is going to be different depending on who you are and the intersectionalities of your experiences and your identity within the housing system as well as within society. So I can see that we're essentially running out of time. So I'd like to pass the mic back to Annika to close out the summit.
Thanks so much, Sandro, and thanks to all of our panelists for a really invigorating conversation that really sort of illustrates the kinds of innovations that are taking place, the ideas that are floating around. I think a huge amount of creativity in this panel, and gives us a chance to reflect on some of what we've heard throughout the week in terms of the systems change that needs to take place. So thank you all so much for that. As we come to the end of 2 days, let me just say thank you to all for your participation, to our panelists throughout the 2 days. I'll just make a reminder that we will be posting the videos from the sessions within the next 24 hours, hopefully on the Windsor Law City's website, and we'll be sharing that on social media as well. So for anything that you missed, and for those of you who were only able to join us for this session today. I hope that you'll have a chance to go back and engage with some of that systems level thinking in the other panels as well. Again, please keep the ideas flowing. Let us know what else you'd like to see in terms of programming. I can commit at this point that there will be more programming on housing and on housing systems coming to you from the center and hopefully with our partners again. So please do help us frame that for you. Thanks so much for giving us a big part of your week, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much.